Here's the question. How do you make the impossible possible? Simple. Remove the I am, the ego. Now, how do you step into that newfound possibility? With a series of small intentional steps. Never forget, the greatest among us started from humble beginnings. But to truly unlock your potential, realize you're here for something greater. If you're yearning for more than just a good life, let's take that small step together to reach greatness. Welcome to the Greatness from Small Beginnings podcast, where we're talking to those who have gone from mediocrity to motivated, overlooked to overachieving, forgettable to unforgettable. Are you ready? Let's go. Welcome back, everybody, to the Greatness from Small Beginnings podcast. And I am, as you know, the quintessential person that's come from small beginnings. That being said, there are some things that I am experienced at that I would consider myself, well, expert's probably a stretch, but pretty good at, based on the years of practice and fatherhood, since it's near Father's Day when this podcast launches. That's something that I've experienced at, and then I have some things to say. So that's what this podcast is about, is how to be a good father. Okay, so let's just pull it in as that particular term, how to be a good father. So essentially, the term that's been thrown around a lot lately that probably fits the best, that we need to consider as probably the right one for this conversation, is servant leader. You know, in leadership in business, at work, in organizations, these kind of things, servant leadership is a big thing. It's a good thing. It's talked about a lot. There's a lot of definitions of it. And you can go on to YouTube and find lots about it. But when you talk about the quintessential position in life that we, especially as men, need to be good at, and as you look forward to, let's say, the deathbed experience or your older age, you don't want to look back and regret on this one, which is fatherhood. And you want to have been the servant leader for that group, because that is the best way to lead your children and your family. So I'm a simple guy, and I like to pull everything into groups of three. Or at least no more than three, because I'm very simple. And if I have to remember 5 things, it's very difficult. So my 3 main things when it comes to father, the servant leader, and if I thought and lived in that concept for 40 years, that the main thing I need to realize is that I'm not just a husband, I'm not just a father, but I'm the leader of the home. And what is my roles? What are my 3 main roles? And it's to provide. And I believe that's God-given. And it doesn't matter if my wife works and I don't, or if she makes more and I make less. That doesn't matter to me. My job is to point my mind and heart in my thinking and in my practical being, and then in the doing. It's my responsibility to make sure my family is provided for. So that's number 1. Protect. I have a pretty big protective mechanism. And so for me, this one is fairly simple. And yet I've had to draw lines in my own head, decide I'm going to do this thing and I'm not going to do this thing in this situation. Because I'm very protective about things, I needed to come up with a kind of an internal dialogue about, there are some times when I need to wait and see. I need to allow my children and my family to have an assault on it a little bit and give it a moment to see how this is going to work before I just react and get into protection mode and basically thwart the enemy. I got to watch what I'm doing there. Still to this day, I don't have any kids that live with me anymore. And still, I watch my family and I say, I think we need to concern ourselves with this issue that's coming up, or cultural issues, or spiritual issues. Or when we're together as a family, there might be some things that come up, and I might have to have some conversations later behind the scenes. But often I've discovered that right there in the moment, not necessarily the perfect time. So, so protect is something that is not just pick up a sword and vanquish the enemy, but it might mean an ongoing, how do I look at what the family needs long term, and then help them with it. And then here's the one that is harder to define, but for me, this is what it means. So provide, protect, and love. I, as the man, the leader of the home, actually set the culture for the love that's in the home. Now, moms in the home, wives, they are very nurturing. They are more practically loving by nature. And yet I either encourage that and buy into that, or I push that down, or I push that out. And what I've discovered over the years is that we as good fathers, we as men that want to be good fathers, we are the ones that determine the culture of love in a home, not the wives, not the moms. Moms are going to be more loving typically. Now remember, as many of these words I say, there's a lot of bad moms and bad dads out there. And I say bad loosely. I don't even know exactly what I mean by that, except that some of you have had bad experiences with your parents and the parents never came around, or perhaps they did later in life. But got to remember one thing is we all have a deck of cards we've been dealt. And it is our responsibility to acquire the cards to win the game. There's no doubt about that. But often our parents from other cultures, other times, have not been given all the great tools. My dad is a great example of that. And I say this to honor my father. He was he had some faults, and there's no doubt about it. If he was sitting right next to me right now, he would admit those. Procrastination was one of them. He did have uh, a little bit of a temper, not in a violent way, of course, but well, I don't mean of course, but he wasn't violent. But he did respond. He didn't have a father. He was raised by his grandmother. He did have a father, but his father wasn't present. And so he didn't learn how to do it well. But I give my dad great kudos because he broke the fatherlessness cycle in the generations, and I didn't have to deal with that. So thank God for my father. That's for sure. But he did set the tone for love in the house. If we needed understanding, if we needed a deeper understanding, a deeper sense of what we needed to look at as people to grow, he was always the right guy for that. My mom would, of course, do that too. But dad was really the right person to unfold things and help us understand. Here's the way I'm going to set up what I'm going to talk about in regards to the fatherhood and how we can be the good fathers. Some of you are going to be encouraged by this. Hopefully there's some takeaways at the end, and that's exactly what I hope. So it's called Think, Be, Do. We have to be thoughtful people, and I've talked about this before on the podcast, is that I am often frustrated by how especially men and older men get in a cycle of just not thinking and not learning and not growing as people. But the things that we need to consider and think about as dads are these things. I've written some down here. Consider like a 20-year timeline when we're considering how we deal with our kids today, because that really matters. In 20 years, they're going to be whatever age it is. And what is my goal for them? And is there anything I can do now in this situation to enhance that and get them to that goal? And you don't have a perfect picture of what 20 years from now looks like. But if you constantly ask that question, you're going to do better as a dad. There's no doubt about that. And then how do I do best at this? I was built a certain way. And I was made a certain way by God. And I need to do this the way that leans my direction and not pick it up in some book and then just take that as the way I have to do things. I need to figure out who I am and how I'm supposed to father. Another thing we need to think is close our mouths. That's an active thing, but then engage our mind into, well, what if I open my mouth right now and say the thing I want to say? Or what if I don't? And then what's the worst that can happen if I do or don't? A couple good questions to think about real quick. And those thoughts can go pretty fast. That's a 5 to 10 second train of thought. And some of the tools you can use to do that is just give me a moment. Someone did that to me recently. I was on a Zoom call and they said, give me a minute to think about it. Give me a moment to think about that. And they took about 10 awkward seconds and then responded. I thought that was very interesting. And I thought if I had used that with my kids, it probably would have been a really good thing. And then what do they need to know? Ultimately am I trying to teach them? And if I keep that in mind all the time, I'm going to do better. Now I need to think ahead of time about those things. The questions I'm going to ask myself in the moment and the thinking patterns that I develop in every area of my life, at work and other places, I need to consider, well, what are those things that I need to have them think? Therefore, I need to think them first, or at least in work my way down the path of thinking them so that I can teach them how to think. And then the B is to be a servant leader, to serve them. Of course, we're going to get up in the middle of the night, protect them. Of course, we're going to, our teenagers are out at 11 o'clock and the car breaks down. Of course, we're going to go and we're going to do those things. But in the small things, go help them, go be part of their lives and do the things for them that will help them, really help them in that 20-year picture. Be consistent, which is a role model thing. We need to do a good job of being a role model. No doubt about that. And then just be involved and be engaged. Be that dependable dad that does what he says he's going to do and says what he's going to do and then does it, right? Be that person. And then, of course, if, my goodness, a schedule changes at work, you have to work overtime, something happens and you have to deal with some issue, then just communicate. No doubt about that. Just communicate. That creates a dependability in you, as long as it doesn't, of course, happen all the time. You want to be able to keep your promises, but just communicate with your kids as people, because they are. And if you treat them with respect and honor that God made them with, then you're going to get further with them. They are resilient, but they're more resilient and more forgiving based on how you respond to them and how you model that in their lives. And then the do is to show up all the time, show up to them in a surprising way, walk in their bedroom, sit on their bed, check on them, touch them. My grandkids, I didn't do it much with my kids, although I did some. I kiss my grandkids on the head. I just want them to know that I'm close and that they have unconditional love. And then discipline, be their disciplinarian, not in a harsh, negative way, of course, but that you are the disciplined person. You're considering that in your life and you're pulling it off. And then you're passing it to them in multiple practical ways. And then let's talk a minute about dad guilt. When we have to work 50 or 60 hours a week over and over and over again, we have guilt over that. Okay, mom guilt, it's a real thing, but dad guilt exists too. And I heard somebody in a conference ask a question of the speaker, what do I do about this business that's taken so much time over the years from me? And the man said, I used to tell my kids I'm sorry. And when they were both late teens, I sat them both down and I said, I'm not sorry. I'm not. I sacrificed things. I was sorry that I couldn't be there for you all the time at your sporting events and all those things. but I am not sorry that I missed things here and there. I have built a legacy. In his case, he was talking a lot about businesses and dollars and different things. And he's built a legacy that now they don't have to build. A lot of it's already built. And then they just have to decide now how to enhance it to some degree, not in a wealth standpoint, not from a wealth standpoint, but I've done that for my kids and their grandkids we have a little we have a little bit of legacy. We have a nice a house, a big house, and we have some property, and we have a few things. But more important than that, I'm starting to put together what are our family core values that I can pass along to our kids, and they can pass to their kids. And those are the really important things. So we shouldn't, I'm not saying we shouldn't feel dad guilt, but we shouldn't live in the dad guilt. We should consider the fact as we look out more than 20 years, because 20 years puts them at 15 years, 20 years puts them at a certain age. We have goals for that. We want to see that. But when we look out 40 and 50 years from where you are today, you very likely will live that long. And what do you want life to look like for you and them? And that means that sometimes we have to sacrifice today to get that thing done. But the main thing is to be a thinker, because it all stems on thinking. And then when it comes to the B, the things we need to do in life, it's important to decide ahead of time when you're thinking that I'm going to be this kind of person, this is how I'm going to act it out. And then in the do, you just put it in your calendar and you make the things practical. My sales team at work, not all of them have young kids, but I've talked to all of them about time blocking the things that are important to you, and put those in before you put your work time blocks in. Because if they don't have that life, they're not as good at sales. There's no doubt about that. So I'm very careful to encourage them to do that. And these are decisions then ahead of time that they're time blocking for. So go out and be the good father you want to be, but go through the progression of think, be, and the be is a decision as you're thinking. And then the do, just go actively do the thing and then come back, rotate back. And it's a cycle you go through of think, be, do, and you continually do that. Had I learned that in my 20s, I probably would have been much better off. That being said, I'm going to finish up with a quote, one of my favorite quotes. Now listen, fathers, listen to this. You are designed for accomplishment, engineered for success, and endowed with seeds of greatness. Now, the call to action. Go be great.